A single tweet just erased $500 million in minutes. Planes grounded, cities cut off. And the real fight? It's not even about aviation. This is the hidden war reshaping North America, and you're caught in the crossfire. On the surface, this looks like a straightforward trade dispute. America versus Canada. Tariffs on aircraft. Business as usual, right? Wrong. Because if you think this battle is simply about who builds better planes, you're missing the entire picture. The real story isn't unfolding in boardrooms or hangars. It's happening thousands of miles away, in the corridors of power in Beijing. Just before the threat dropped, something quietly significant occurred. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, flew to China. Not for a photo op, for business. The two nations announced what they called a new strategic partnership. They shook hands on reducing trade barriers. They signaled closer economic ties. And in Washington, alarm bells went off. Because in the eyes of American policymakers, this wasn't just diplomacy. It was Canada leaning toward the one country the United States sees as its greatest long-term rival. The optics were terrible, the timing even worse. So when the aircraft threat landed days later, seasoned political observers didn't see randomness. They saw strategy, a calculated countermeasure, a warning shot fired across Canada's bow with one simple message: be very careful who you align yourself with. This is where it gets even more layered. Right now, North America is heading into something massive. The USMCA, the trade agreement binding the United States, Canada, and Mexico together, is up for mandatory review starting this year. That review will determine the economic relationship between these three nations for the next decade, possibly longer. And this plane fight? It's not a sideshow. It's the opening move. By threatening one of Canada's most vital industries, aerospace, the administration is creating leverage. It's putting pressure on Ottawa before the real negotiations even begin. The goal isn't just to win a dispute over airplanes. It's to shape Canada's behavior on far bigger questions, especially anything involving China. So the next time you hear the phrase decertify Bombardier, don't just think jets and tariffs. Think power. Think geopolitics. Think about a struggle to define what North America will look like for the next generation. Because this fight was never really about planes at all. Now let's bring this home. Let's make it personal. Imagine you're booking a flight. Maybe it's Indianapolis to New York, or Charlotte to Memphis, short hop, regional route, everyday travel. Chances are you're flying on a Canadian-built plane, and you don't even know it. This isn't theoretical. This is your next trip. Major American carriers depend heavily on aircraft manufactured in Canada. Delta Airlines operates 181 Bombardier CRJ regional jets. American and United have hundreds more in their fleets. These aren't luxury planes. They're the workhorses, the connectors. The jets that link small cities to major hubs and keep the entire domestic network functioning. Without them, the system doesn't just slow down, it breaks. Now here's where the tariff threat gets real. A 50% tariff doesn't immediately ground the planes already in service, but it devastates the future. Airlines planning to replace aging aircraft suddenly face wildly inflated costs. The math stops working. So what do? They have two choices, and both are terrible. Option 1. Absorb the cost. But that pushes operating expenses to unsustainable levels. Profit margins vanish. Smaller carriers collapse. Even the big ones bleed. Option 2. Pass the cost directly to passengers. Ticket prices skyrocket. And here's the cruel domino effect. Routes to smaller cities, already operating on thin margins, become completely unprofitable. Service gets slashed. Flights disappear. Towns get cut off. This is how a trade war targeting Canadian aerospace turns into an assault on American mobility. Your ability to travel affordably and conveniently becomes collateral damage in a geopolitical chess match. And the people hit hardest? Not the elites flying first class on transcontinental routes. It's everyday travelers in places like Sioux Falls, Albany, or Boise, cities that depend on regional jets to stay connected to the rest of the country. The plane fight isn't abstract. It's your ticket, your route, your city. So the threat is made. The announcement drops. The president says he's going to decertify Canadian-built aircraft. Sounds dramatic, sounds powerful. But here's the question. Aviation lawyers and safety experts immediately started asking, can he actually do that? The short answer? It's never been done. And if attempted, it would trigger absolute legal chaos. Here's why. In the entire history of American aviation, no president has ever directly decertified an aircraft. That authority has always rested with one agency, the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA. And their decisions are supposed to be grounded, pun intended, in hard engineering data and rigorous safety analysis. Not politics, not trade disputes, science. One senior aviation consultant didn't mince words. They said using aircraft certification as a bargaining chip in a trade war is an incredibly bad idea. And almost immediately, you could see the White House scrambling to clarify. An official quietly told Reuters that the threat wasn't aimed at planes already in service. It applied only to new aircraft, future deliveries coming off production lines. This was a massive walkback, because the original statement implied everything was on the table, including the 648 CRJ jets currently flying Americans around the country every single day. Think about what would happen if they tried to ground those planes. Airlines would file emergency injunctions within hours. Federal judges would demand to see the safety justification, and the administration would have none, because there isn't one. These planes have been flying safely for years, so the decertification threat, while terrifying as a headline, is mostly a political weapon. The real danger, the one with actual teeth, is the 50% tariff on new aircraft. That's something a president has far more direct power to impose. And that's the move that could genuinely reshape the industry. The first threat grabs attention. The second one could destroy livelihoods. Let's step back for a moment, because if you're listening to Canadian officials, historians, and policy experts right now, they'll tell you something crucial. This plane fight? It's not about planes. A prominent professor recently called it incidental. What's really at stake is something far deeper. Canadian sovereignty, the question of who gets to make decisions in North America, and whether Canada remains an independent economic power or becomes a subordinate. The context is chilling. A top Canadian union leader described this as a continued attack on Canada's industrial economy. A historian at the University of Toronto went even further, stating that relations between Canada and the United States are now at their worst point since the 1880s. The 1880s. That's not hyperbole over a few jets. That's a recognition of a fundamental rupture, and the timing tells you everything. This threat landed just days after Canada announced a preliminary trade deal with China. And just 1 week earlier, the administration warned of a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods if that China deal goes through. The aircraft threat is a precision strike, a targeted pressure point, a warning. Your key industries are vulnerable. Fall in line, or we'll turn the screws. Experts now predict that the upcoming USMCA renegotiation won't resemble a normal trade discussion. One analyst said it will be performative, with maximum public pressure and attempts to extract concessions through spectacle and intimidation. The deeper fear among Canadians? That this is all building toward what some are calling a commercial union. The idea is simple: no tariffs between the two countries, but one common external tariff, set entirely by Washington. To many Canadians, that doesn't sound like partnership. It sounds like absorption, like becoming an economic province of the United States, stripped of the ability to negotiate independently on the world stage. This jet fight is the first shot in that much larger war. Now let's talk about the immediate shockwave. The morning after the social media post, Bombardier's stock plunged 9%. In a matter of hours, hundreds of millions of dollars in market value simply evaporated. This is the cost of uncertainty. It's what happens when investors who've bet billions on stable rules and predictable policy suddenly realize the ground beneath them is shifting. And the panic wasn't confined to stock tickers. Down in the real world, aviation lawyers were flooded with frantic calls. Their clients, people who own or were about to purchase a Bombardier jet, were terrified. Imagine you've just committed $50 million to a new aircraft. You've signed contracts, you've planned routes, and then the president suggests that plane might be decertified. You're not just concerned. You're in full crisis mode, asking your lawyer if your multi-million-dollar asset is about to become a very expensive piece of scrap metal. The White House clarification helped, yes. But the damage was done. The message had been sent loud and clear. Even deeply integrated multi-billion-dollar industries with thousands of American jobs aren't safe from sudden explosive policy announcements. It forces everyone to ask the terrifying question. If they'll do this to planes, what's next? Automobiles, lumber, steel? That stock plunge isn't just a number on a screen. It's a warning siren for the entire cross-border economy. So let's address the core accusation. Why is Canada supposedly blocking American-made Gulfstream jets? The claim sounds damning. But when you dig into the facts, the story becomes far more complicated. First, the accusation isn't even entirely accurate. The administration said Canada is refusing to certify 4 Gulfstream models. In reality, Canada has already approved 2 of them, the G500 and G600. The holdup is on the newer G700 and G800. And here's the critical detail everyone's missing. There's a legitimate, documented safety concern. American regulators themselves have only given these new planes a temporary certificate. The FAA granted Gulfstream an exemption, essentially saying, you have until the end of 2026 to prove your fuel systems work properly when ice accumulates at high altitude. This isn't bureaucratic nitpicking. It's an unresolved engineering question. Water in jet fuel can freeze. If ice blocks a fuel line mid-flight, engines stop. That's catastrophic. Canada, with its harsh winters and colder operating environments, takes this risk extremely seriously. So Transport Canada's position is straightforward. Show us the completed safety data first, then we'll certify. They're refusing to rubber stamp the FAA's decision. In the wake of past certification controversies, think Boeing 737 MAX, they're being extra cautious. So when the United States calls this an illegal blockade, Canada calls it responsible oversight. And here's where aviation experts are genuinely alarmed. Threatening a safety regulator for political reasons sets a horrifying precedent. You're turning the technical processes that literally keep planes in the air into bargaining chips. Once you cross that line, how can anyone trust the system? Now let's zoom all the way out. Because this isn't an isolated skirmish. It's the opening move in a much, much larger game. The USMCA, the treaty governing all trade between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, has a built-in clause requiring a mandatory review. By July of this year, the 3 nations must decide, extend the deal as written, revise it, or trigger a 10-year countdown to expiration. This plane fight landed just as that high-stakes negotiation was beginning. And that's the context most people are missing. Top analysts are now calling the upcoming review performative. They predict public spectacle, maximum pressure, and attempts to extract concessions through intimidation rather than negotiation. By threatening a core Canadian industry like aerospace, the administration creates instant, massive leverage. It's a demonstration of willingness to blow up deeply integrated sectors to get what it wants. So what does it want? Some experts believe the endgame is a so-called commercial union. The idea, eliminate tariffs between the United States and Canada, but impose one unified external tariff on the rest of the world, controlled entirely by Washington. For Canada, that would mean losing the ability to negotiate trade deals independently. It would mean ceding economic sovereignty. And that's why this plane fight matters so much. It's not the endgame. It's the first loud public warning shot in a battle that will define North American trade and power for the next generation. Here's the ultimate irony in all of this. The biggest customer for these so-called unsafe Canadian jets? The United States Department of Defense. Yes, you read that correctly. While this is being framed as a civilian trade dispute, the U.S. military is a massive operator of aircraft built on Canadian airframes. The Army's new Hades spy plane, based on the Bombardier Global 6500, the Air Force's E-11 BACN, a flying communications hub that kept operations running over Afghanistan, also a modified Bombardier Global. The Navy uses Canadian-built Twin Otters for training. So the immediate question becomes, does this decertification threat apply to military aircraft too? When asked, a White House official gave a vague, non-committal answer. They refused to differentiate between civilian and military planes. Aviation experts say military aircraft follow a separate certification process and shouldn't be affected by this nonsense, their word, not mine. But they also acknowledge that as commander-in-chief, a president could theoretically intervene there as well, which creates an absolutely surreal scenario. The United States could be threatening to decertify the very platforms its own military depends on for critical surveillance and communications missions. It pits an America First trade policy directly against America First national security. Which priority wins? That confusion alone reveals how a broadside aimed at Canada can create immediate, chaotic blowback, right in the heart of the Pentagon. So here's where we are. A trade threat that started as a shocking headline about decertifying Canadian aircraft has revealed itself to be something far more complex. It's not really about aviation safety. It's not even primarily about trade. It's about power. It's about testing the limits of economic sovereignty in North America. It's about sending a message to a northern neighbor that's been exploring closer ties with China. It's about creating leverage before the most important trade negotiation in a generation. And the collateral damage? It's real. Stock markets panic, airlines scramble, small cities face the loss of connectivity. Military planners wonder if the tools they depend on will suddenly be deemed unacceptable. All of it triggered by a single social media post. The question now isn't whether Canada will back down. It's whether this is just the beginning. Whether we're watching the first chapter of a much longer, much messier struggle over what North America becomes in the decades ahead. Because once you weaponize safety regulations, once you turn technical certification into a political bargaining chip, once you threaten industries that employ tens of thousands on both sides of the border, you've crossed a line, and you can't uncross it. The planes will keep flying for now, but the trust, the stability, the idea that rules matter more than power, that might have just been grounded. If this opened your eyes to what's really happening behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button. We're tracking every move in this trade war and the bigger geopolitical chess game it's a part of. Drop a comment and let me know. Do you think this is about safety, or is it pure politics? And what should Canada do next? Let's talk about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.